focus on career security over job security. What can I do as a paralegal to literally build up career armor, to make it so that it doesn't matter what happens to this job? They can walk in here and fire me tomorrow or lay me off. I'm going to be employed or freelancing, right? Yeah. Tomorrow.
All right. Hello, Miss Ann Pearson.
Hello, Jaclyn Foster.
It's so great to finally have you on my podcast. To be completely honest, I've fangirled over you probably for 2 years. I've been following you and your business. And I remember when somebody first mentioned you to me, and I went and looked, and this was years ago. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. All the things you've built and your background. But I don't want to take your introduction away from you because it is so incredible. And I know you're going to be able to tell it the best. So why don't we just start by you telling the listeners a little bit about yourself, your background as a paralegal, and what led you to go on to build the Paralegal Bootcamp?
Oh, thank you. Well, I started the Paralegal Bootcamp after many years of working in law firms in different roles, and we can touch on those. But I started it in 2010 because after being a paralegal manager for many years and being tasked with making the paralegals profitable, I had to look at different practice areas. And one practice area in particular in litigation had an issue where they felt like they needed $80,000 a year paralegals, but they were working on cases that were restricted to $65 an hour to bill out for paralegals. And so they weren't very profitable, obviously. And so when two positions opened up, I went to the partners and I said, I want to go hire a few new paralegals directly out of Emory's paralegal certificate program and train them from the ground up. And they're like, no. We need somebody who can start with their feet on the ground, running these cases just like this. And I said, no, please trust me with this. And so we could hire them at a little less salary. And I trained them from the ground up. I would bring them in batches of at least 2 or 3 so that it was worth my time. And I would meet with them once a week and bring them through real life cases in the firm. And instead of them doing things for the attorneys, they would do assignments and hand in their assignments to me so that I would mark it up and they could fix it before the attorneys ever saw it. And so within 1 year, they were either promoted to a paralegal position or eventually let go. And it worked so well that after a few years, and it was so rewarding to me to hear these partners say, when they would be describing these paralegals to me, or I'd hear them in front of a client or whatever, say that, oh, this is my rock star paralegal, Laura, or this is my rock star paralegal, Kim. And I would just be beaming with pride, like they were my kids or something, And so after a while, you can only hire so many paralegals and do that. And that's when I decided I want this feeling all the time. I want to be able to have more people than that experience this, because when I started my paralegal career, you can probably relate. I started it in 1992, fresh out of school, and there was no training. There was nobody showing me anything. There was no senior paralegal taking me under their wing and saying, this is how you do it. And then I would find years later, particularly as a paralegal manager, that some of the paralegals just were downright mean to the new paralegals. And they would actually be stingy with their knowledge because they felt like there was competition. They don't want to show the new paralegal how to be a great paralegal because they might be better than them.
Yeah.
And so that's how the Paralegal Bootcamp started. It started with what I still have, my flagship course, my Litigation Bootcamp, and from there has developed into other courses. And I get to see that every day. At my job, I just feel so grateful sometimes. My job is to read reviews from people saying the sweetest things about how I changed the trajectory of their career. Right. And the other part that I really love about it is when I was a paralegal, even with all the stress and the problems and things, learning how to do these things, trial and error usually, even with all of that, I always felt like I love my job. I loved being a paralegal. Like I worked a lot, and people used to call me a workaholic because I'd work on the weekends or late. And it was because I worked on big cases, but also it was because I loved going to work every day. I
Right.
literally did. And I would look down the hall at people who were grumpy and would complain about it and think, why don't they love their job? They're working at the same firm. They're working with the same attorneys as me. Why doesn't everybody love being a paralegal?
Right.
And I realized it's because it's not always the same for every paralegal, especially if you struggle. You've probably seen this in some Facebook groups, the complaint from new paralegals about not getting the training and either quitting or getting fired because they didn't know what they were doing. And when they're quitting, they're usually posting things like, I just don't think I'm cut out to be a paralegal.
Yep.
And I feel so bad because they've invested this time and money into this paralegal certificate program. They've invested, their blood, sweat, and tears. The first year on the job, they've been, beaten up practically, not physically, but, emotionally beaten up. And they just feel like so bad that they're going to give up entirely on their career. And I just hate reading those.
Oh, I totally agree. And when you said I absolutely resonate with what you were saying about this, what happens to paralegals. I started my first job. I was only about 2 quarters into my paralegal education, and I got an internship that turned into a permanent role as a legal assistant. And I got no training. My first job, or my first assignment on the job, the first day I showed up there, the attorney gave me a case for an expungement, which he knew in the back of his head, like, there's no way we're getting this record expunged. There's absolutely no way it's happening for our client. And I think he even already told the client that, but he said, I don't have an extra computer for you yet. Why don't you, it's a small solo firm. Go down to the courthouse, to the library. There's a computer there, and there's the whole library that you could start doing some legal research. Try to find me some case law that would get this particular person an expunged record. He's like, spend as much time as you need on it. I don't have anything else for you today. So I did. I went down there. I remember calling my mom in tears. I'm like, this is obviously, I'm so dumb. I have no idea. I'm trying to work Westlaw or whatever it was that I was using at the time for research, and I couldn't find anything. And I did. At the end of the day, I came back with this tiny little brief that I wrote up with the best case law I thought I could find. And he giggled. He's like, yeah, there's no way she's getting it expunged, but I'm actually impressed with the case law you found. It maybe could work. And we laughed about it. I never got any formal training. I had to Google what interrogatories were. I had to Google even what, probate was. I was not through the program yet. And I was 18 years old. No life experience even. And I can remember the day that I sat down and the attorney had asked me to go run through his email quick and find something. And I opened his email up, and in big bold letters right in the subject line, it says, do not ask me to help Jaclyn anymore. I don't have time. She's not smart, all these things. And I could have been the moment I walked out on that, it's not like the firm needed me. It was, I was getting paid, but I didn't. I just continued, and I actually did go to the attorney and I said, I need more support. If you can give me any, guidance. And he did end up giving me, I think it was 10-minute little coffee sessions to run through something new every day. But I know a lot of people will see an email like that, and they're already insecure about their abilities. And just like you said, you see in these groups, paralegals saying, is it normal I make these mistakes? Am I not cut out for it? Because there's nobody there to push them. That sort of segues me into asking you, we can't change the way every lawyer or every paralegal manager thinks. We can't change the entire world. We're only a couple of people right now trying to change the industry from the inside and filling gaps. What are you seeing, those paralegals that come through and changing the trajectory? I know you're giving course, and we'll talk about the courses that you have available to paralegals to enhance their skill sets and to give them the guidance that the firms aren't giving them themselves. What are you encouraging? What do you encourage paralegals out there that feel like the Jaclyn sitting in that chair reading that email felt, to keep going and push through this industry? What is that tipping point for them where they'll feel like, yes, I'm glad I stayed?
When they realize that it really was all just a lack of training. I think that's when they realize it. And, I think I should probably back up too, because I don't want to make this sound like I'm bashing all attorneys and other paralegals and stuff, because there is the other side of it, right? Where attorneys want to practice law. They want to bill hours to their clients. They want to practice law and do those types of things. And the senior paralegals, if they're the good ones that I know that want to help, are they're usually so good that they're too busy because all the attorneys want to use them. So it's like this, it's like a no-win situation, but in terms of like what I see, it's where, well, first in my course, I revised it. I did a major overhaul of it last year. And I did that because it used to just be litigation skills training. So it was all like from the complaint all the way through the trial and everything in between, drafting discovery, getting ready for trial, depositions, all that kind of stuff. And one of the things that I always felt like it was lacking, but was worried it was going to make it too long of a course, was what I have always said is every great paralegal has three different I put it in a Venn diagram, mindset, behaviors, and skills. And because you can probably relate, you could have a paralegal, I have met dozens of them before, who has great skills. They're really good at what they do. But if they have a bad mindset, either bad, poor, like meaning how they interact with their colleagues, or just a bad mindset in that they think less of themselves, they don't think they're capable of doing it, they think they're in this imposter syndrome, or if they have bad behaviors, like you might have a really great paralegal who can't manage their time, can't communicate with others, all the things, the behaviors that make for a great paralegal. And so I decided, all right, I'm adding it in there because I felt like I have to be able to give them the full gamut instead of just the skills. And surprisingly, the feedback I was getting, literally, I think one person out of a couple hundred who have gone through the new version, one person said that mindset stuff was a little woo-wooey, but everybody else appreciates it, but I think that it takes all three of those to be able to change the trajectory.
Yeah, and so, no, and I totally agree with that. What you said, I've had paralegals that I've interacted with through my agency that they don't have super strong skills. Maybe in certain areas they're lacking, but their behavior and their mindset and their, what I have always called the solution-based mindset, meaning if I don't know something, I'm going to figure it out. That translates into every skill set you build up over time. If you keep that mindset going, you can conquer any practice area with some training because you're going to figure it out. But then you add in those tools like which you are offering, adding in the tools of the skill set enhancement. So, I love that you said the three with the behavior and the mindset. I put mindset into my courses too. And I've had all good responses so far, but I'm waiting for the woo-woo because I go deep into mindset. I go deep into mindset. So that leads me to, going back to your story on you were training paralegals and now you've made a business out of it. Kudos to you for going. I actually circled it in big because my listeners have heard me talk about this several times, the concept of being an intrapreneur. And that's exactly what you were in that moment in your law firm, of recognizing the firm is not very profitable in the way they're hiring skilled paralegals, but not billing it out appropriately for what they have to pay. And let's put that on its side and start building great paralegals and being able to hire a little bit lower rates for what have you. And then, you've obviously translated that into your entrepreneurship, that intrapreneurship into the entrepreneurship, which is really cool. But that leads me to a question, and I'm just curious to know, have you found that firms are able to leverage educational courses like this to be able to utilize in their firm for their new hires?
They do. Yeah, they do all the time. In fact, I would say it's probably, so I have the Litigation Bootcamp is only open a few times a year. So my other courses are available year round. And so law firms will reach out to me, either their manager or their managing partners, and they will purchase bulk seats. So they'll come and say, hey, we've got 40 paralegals that we want to enroll in this course. And some of them, like the Billable Hour Bootcamp, I do those as live 5-part training webinar series. But what I have found is that at least 50, maybe 60% of my revenue comes from those inquiries.
Oh,
Law
wow.
firm managers, law firm attorneys who will reach out. Then the other part, so I went along for years thinking that all the other individual purchases were paralegals coming and putting down their credit cards. But come to find out after I dig deeper into it, a lot of those are paralegals getting their attorney's credit card. And
Yeah.
or so what's funny is I always tell them when I'm going through this, because they'll say, gosh, that's an expensive course, Ann, and I'm only making $40,000-$50,000 a year. And I'm like, you shouldn't be paying for it. Go to the attorneys and ask them to pay for it. And they will, so either they're too afraid to, or they don't want to admit that they don't know what they don't know. Or they will go through the course and then happen to mention it when the attorney says, oh, I see you're doing this. And, they notice the improvement, and they'll say, yeah, I took the litigation boot camp. And they'll reach back out to me and say, can I get a copy of that receipt again? My attorney's going to reimburse me for it.
Nice.
So I tell, whether it's my course or any training that a paralegal's taking, if you're working in a law firm, don't feel like you should pay for it yourself. Because here's the thing, if you go ask, the worst they can do is say no. They're not going to fire you and say, Jackie, why would you even ask if we will pay for a course? You're fired.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
But here's the bigger thing. This is what I have found is, and I heard this straight from the horse's mouth. So when I heard that, I was like, ooh, I never thought of that. I got to tell paralegals that when they ask, is that attorneys feel less guilty then, because they feel guilty right now that they don't have the time to train you, the good ones, right? The managers do too. Like I remember when I was doing my training program and kind of word was getting around in Atlanta, and then I took over the San Diego office and the New York office, and one of the paralegal managers from a very big AmLaw 50 firm reached out to me and said, you were talking in the paralegal managers group one time about how you put together this training checklist for your litigation paralegals. Could you share that with me? And I did. And she said, you do that with them? And I said, yeah, I meet with them once a week. She's like, I don't have time for that. That once a week, you meet with them for an hour to 2 hours once a week? And I said, yeah. So even your managers, like you might actually, just by asking them to pay for it, you might be relieving some guilt. They could say, oh, check that off my list.
Yes, absolutely. And you know what? Paralegals that have been paralegals and go on to being managers can be, and obviously there's going to be bad in every group of the conversation, but what I have found in the paralegals that reach out to me and we have real talk, because it's paralegal to paralegal, it's a really fun conversation. And the thing they say to me is like trying to get my attorneys to, give me more time or afford me a week off where I take my new hires on a retreat somewhere and just to get out of the office and train them, because they've been there. Those paralegals started at some point in their career too, and they want to be good managers for the next generation of paralegals coming up behind them. And so this is a huge point to make right now, because I'm in the legal recruiting area, right? We recruit, and all of 2022 and 2023, the biggest topic that recruiters were having with law firms is the data is unequivocal. Paralegals are leaving law firms and associates, but we're focusing on the paralegals right now, are leaving law firms for other opportunities more than for the reason of salary and benefits. The number one reason was for career development. And like you just said, attorneys, usually in these scenarios, they barely have time they're already drowning, already filing for extensions of time on half of their cases, and they can't even carve out a half hour a day or 15 minutes a morning to bring you up. But it doesn't mean that they don't know in the back of their minds, like, to keep this paralegal, I need to give them something. And it is, to me, I think, an honorable request to ask your attorney, say for instance, you're in a firm that does pre-litigation, but from time to time, maybe 5 times a year or 2 times a year, you have things go to trial. You have a trial course available, and they need to freshen up on their trial skills. I don't care if you've been a paralegal for 9 years. If you sit out a trial for too long, you kind of forget, that is the big takeaway. I want these paralegals to hear that all of Ann's courses, all of the courses that you have, Ann, the firms should really consider investing in for those paralegals. And if you don't ask, attorneys need to be asked. They from every angle of the matter, they aren't purposely not giving you opportunities to grow. They just don't even think to go online and find Ann. They don't think that there's solutions out there for them to still be developing your career without them putting their time in. And if you're, say a course is $700 and that attorney is saving, I don't know how many hours, that course is, that your big course is, but think about how many hours the attorney is saving in billables and all the things you're learning while the attorney is off making money.
Yeah. Yeah. It's 16 hours.
Wow.
And it's 1 year of live group coaching. So I meet with them live. Yeah. Just because that was the other thing is I felt like I needed to give them more personal support. So we all jump in a Zoom meeting and go live. And yeah, I would encourage paralegals, your listeners, think about it like this. I'll give you a little insider from the management side of things. I'll never forget when I first took over as the paralegal manager, one of the paralegals came to me and asked if she could go to some seminar or something. And I said, sure, let me go get the money. And so I go to HR and HR says, we don't have a budget for paralegal CLEs. And I was like, what do you mean you don't have a budget what's your attorney budget? Well, we can't tell you that. And so I went to the managing partner of the firm who I reported directly to, him and the CFO. I went to the managing partner of the firm and said, literally, what do you mean you don't have a budget for paralegal CLE? And he said, well, they just need to go to their practice group leader. That's where the CLE budget is within the practice groups. And so if they're in mergers and acquisitions, they go to the M&A partner. If they're in litigation, they go to the litigation partner who's in charge. They didn't tell me that when I went down to HR. And so maybe you got to dig even a little bit, right? You could go to a person who doesn't really know the answer to that question, and they could say something like that to you, and you could work at that firm for the next 5 years thinking, I can't ever go to a CLE or I can't go get additional training because they don't pay for it. And it was really because you asked the wrong person.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's in a large firm setting, and even in a small firm setting, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. And I think a lot of you will be surprised. But I guarantee you, the attorney will be like, yeah, here's my card. That's a great idea. Go take that. That would be awesome. Yeah. Especially if you're newer to the firm and the attorneys know they're not training you well. If I would have known about you back when I was training in my first paralegal I had to train in, if I would have known about you, that's what she would have been doing for the first month, once a day or whatever, going through your course, because that changes the trajectory of your new hire. So I have to ask though, I know you have the litigation paralegal bootcamp is open, right? It closes on May 2nd.
Yes.
Okay. Who is the best fit to take your litigation paralegal bootcamp course?
That's a very good question, because if you had asked me that 2 years ago, my answer was always entry-level paralegals in litigation for maybe 3, 4, 5 years or less, or recent graduates from paralegal certificate programs, or legal assistants wanting to maybe be litigation paralegals. That was my typical answer because that's who I made the course for. What I have found, particularly in the response and feedback from the last couple hundred people who have gone through the revised version, is I have some in there who have 7, 8, 9 years of experience. And shame on me for not realizing this, because I've known this all my life, is that what's happened to them is they got left behind, right? So the first 5 years, they, quote, survived at the firm without getting fired. Yes. They hid under the table and did all this, but they didn't learn what they needed to learn. And so by the time they get to the 7, 8, 9 year mark, they realize, I don't know how to go to trial. I've never drafted interrogatories. I don't know anything about depositions. All I did was they stuck me in a room and I reviewed documents, Yes. So surprisingly, and I've had quite a few of those lately. So Now I would answer it where if you're at that level, if you're at the 6, 7, 8 year level, you should ask yourself, do I know everything that I should know to be at this level?
Right. Where's the gaps, like you said? And even, I guess we didn't even think about it. We talk so much about how there's huge gaps with the associates that were in law school during the pandemic, and they're coming out of law school with huge learning gaps. Those, like you just said, 5 years, your litigation goes from your litigation paralegal bootcamp course goes from inception to completion through trial. Is there anywhere in that, whole part of a case that you're having these gaps where you have not been able to truly elevate your skills?
I'll tell you a little sneak peek into something I'm working on and about kind of behind the scenes. So I had a small firm in Chicago take the litigation boot camp, and it was for 2 paralegals, surprisingly 2 associates, and the managing partner, a female. She's a lovely woman. And so she took it with them because she wanted to know, what is this woman teaching my people?
Yeah.
And she knew she didn't have the time to train her associates. So she said, we're all going to sit down every other week, and we're going to watch 1 hour worth, and we're going to implement the thing. What was great is then they implemented those things for the firm as for her practice. Well, she reached out to me like 1.5 years ago and said, you should really be selling this to new associates too, because they're missing so much, between law school. And I recognize, first of all, I don't want to be the associate trainer, but also because I think attorneys, there's this stigma, right? Like, you're a paralegal, what could you possibly teach me? Just like as a paralegal, bar associations won't approve my CLE programs, my programs for CLE, because I'm not an attorney. And so I told her that, and I said, I'd really much rather stick with paralegals. That's where my passion is. And so she said, well, can we work on one together? And I'll take your content and teach it to associates so that it's an attorney teaching it. So we're working on an attorney boot camp that's similar to my litigation one. So
that's amazing. And I just got chills. I'm not kidding you, from the top of my head down my leg in so many ways. Isn't that amazing that an attorney is going to teach your course? An attorney is like, I'll teach it because I totally get what you're saying. And most of the time, it's the managing partners that know how much the paralegal is worth in the firm and how much they know. But the associates come out of school and they're like, I'm an attorney now, I know everything. You're just paralegal. And they learn real quick, quick. But congratulations, Ann, that's incredible. And I hope that people listening really, just because obviously the theme of me and what I do is push paralegals to actualize any dream that they could potentially have for their business, and how you've taken your experience into creating a company that lawyers are wanting to teach your program. That's incredible. Congratulations. That's so very exciting.
Your dog was just photobombing us.
Oh yeah, they always do. They're part of the brand now. They're part of the brand now. I have another one under my desk. So getting back on track. Now, Ann, thank you obviously so much for coming. You've given my listeners, I don't care if they're freelance paralegals wanting to perfect their skills and taking your litigation paralegal why am I struggling with that word? Boot camp course, or brand new paralegals, or paralegals that have way too many gaps in their training over the 5 years of maybe going from firm to firm and need to solidify some things. But you've also been here to just show paralegals that, like you said, behavior, mindset, and skills, those 3 things all have to come together, and you can really, truly change the trajectory of your career and really enhance it. So if there's one piece of advice, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here, to generalize to a paralegal that feel just stuck in their career, that feel frustrated and feel like they've made the wrong decision for choosing the legal industry. What's one piece of advice or words of encouragement you would give them?
To focus on career security over job security. And I know that's hard, especially when you're new, because you're like, oh my God, they're going to fire me if I don't if I make this mistake or whatever. But because to me, that advice carries through no matter how many years you've been a paralegal. And the
Right.
reason I say that, we've all seen the ups and downs. We went through the 2008-9 layoffs. That was horrible, for me to have to lay off a couple of paralegals from the firm. Luckily, it was only a couple from our firm, but the 2008, then there was 2020, and then we weren't sure what was going to happen. And so if you look at all those things and say, what can I do as a paralegal to literally build up career armor, to make it so that it doesn't matter what happens to this job? They can walk in here and fire me tomorrow or lay me off. I'm going to be employed or freelancing, right?
Yeah.
Tomorrow. I have built up this career armor.
Yeah. That is amazing advice. Focus on career security over job security. That is incredible advice. I'm actually going to title the whole podcast episode that, because it translates to everything you're doing. All right. Well, Ann, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. That's a great spot to end at. Thank you so very much. And for everybody listening, I am going to link up all of Ann's information below to access her courses. Get into that course if you're wanting to before May 2nd, when she closes up the doors for enrollment. I'm going to link up all of her socials. Go follow her. Her podcast is amazing. Follow that. And Ann, thank you so very much for joining me today.
Thank you, Jaclyn. It's my pleasure.